we can hold much more together as a group than we can on our own. And feelings that are often overwhelming by ourselves can be held and honored in a room like this. I find it to be so healing in a way when we can just let an experience be, when we don't need to figure it out or do anything about it or necessarily say anything about it. We just allow it to just do what it does. And as simple as that may sound, it's hard to do that in our regular lives. You know, there's so much busyness and stimulation, and there's, you know, is it appropriate at the time or not appropriate at the time? There's things to do, there's other obligations. So a big part of what we do here in this kind of temple that we create is simply creating the space to allow whatever is happening to just run its course, to just be. And we actually honor the experience by just offering it that room, just offering it that kindness and gentleness. Because a lot of times when tragedies like this happen, there really are no words. And there don't need to be any words. And it's part of life, as even the Buddha said, is included in that term dukkha, the suffering, is tragedy. Like it's just part of what happens on this planet sometimes. And to me, that word, tragedy, it's a very powerful word. Like, I'm really glad it exists, because otherwise I wouldn't know how to categorize a whole set of experiences that happen. And that's just how it is. Like, some things are just tragic. It's just what it is. And part of this practice, part of this path is learning how to meet tragedy with dignity and wisdom. Part of what ails this world profoundly is the way we run away from it, is the way we can't be with it, or don't have enough support to actually stay present with it, with tragedy and all the emotions it brings up. You know, and so we try to figure it out, or talk about it, or, you know, think about it. But in a space like this, like it's, I mean, you know, we've all been feeling it for the last few days. But I don't know about you, but with your help, with the support of this group, like, I could settle into it much more than I have been able to in the last few days. And there's really something we create collectively that's quite mysterious and yet very palpable. And so I'm yet again so grateful for this community and this temple that we've all cultivated together, where we have a space to just come and sit with what is. And it's so precious, because I can't think of anywhere else where we get to do that, where we just come and sit with what is. We don't figure it out. We don't solve it. We don't fix it. It just is. You know, and the fact is life is filled with lots of tragedies. There's many things happening that are very sad, very tragic, very painful. And often, especially in this culture where often things are, we've gotten good at making things fairly comfortable. Where I think our capacity to deal with tragedy is actually lessened. It's sort of more shocking in some ways. I've lived in certain cultures where, you know, like in Thailand, for example, where like they're less isolated from it, they're less insulated from it, and or India, for example, where the fragility of life is it kind of stares you in the face often. And this really is the kind of, that Buddhist word dukkha, suffering. This is very much part of it. And, what the Buddha spoke so much about is, so what do we do when this happens? And can we have can we be open-hearted enough and yet grounded enough where we don't look away, where we don't flinch away? And allow the experience to just take its own time. Can we let ourselves not know how long we'll feel it, what the different nuances will be, the way it comes and it goes? I've often found that, you hear in Buddhism often this idea of letting go, right? It's kind of like the central instruction, like let go, let go, let go. And what I've found in my own practice is that often the experience of letting go is actually grieving. The grief is the feeling of letting go. Like letting go is the idea. It's kind of the concept. But the actual, in the moment, flavor is grief or mourning. And it takes time. It's like a process. It's not instant. And when we don't make the time and the space to grieve, we can't let go. And there's no way to make it happen. I think maybe some of you have heard me say this, but the words let go, you can look at that as let go, allow to leave. Right? You see what I mean? Let go. And so I just invite us all to have to hold this experience collectively with the kindness and tenderness that we've been cultivating, many of us for a long time. And I don't know that there's much I can say or anyone can really say about it, but we can create a sacred space within which this process is allowed to happen. Is this making sense? Does anybody want to say anything?
found myself wanting, sort of thinking about safety. And may all beings be safe. Kind of just, that was what I just kept saying.
Yeah.
In that meditation. And I wonder if you could talk about, sort of safety and risk and sort of how that is part of this experience of, because I think when I think of tragedy and I think of things that are really imminently dangerous, there's this desire to just be safe.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's this need to also, not be complacent or not shut down.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that really is there for me.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that question. I think that for me, the move towards safety, it can come like in a different form, like underlying it, meaning that, so there can be this like, well, I'm really scared, so I'm gonna like hide out. I'm gonna like somehow, it's like, because really I'm scared. But that's very different than it coming from a place of sort of care, right? Where it's like, well, no, it's not that I'm scared. It's like I actually care about others, myself. I care about our safety, or whose ever safety. And then so from a place of kind of care and compassion and strength, there's a kind of instinct to protect and hold. And so if we bring it to ourselves, so out of a kind of self-love and self-care, we can keep ourselves safe. We watch out for that and kind of appreciate our own delicateness, appreciate and value our own sensitivity and our own fragility and our own mortality, right? And so appreciating that and being sensitive to that, we may be careful, be thoughtful, be just very intentional with how do we take care of ourselves and each other. I think when it comes from a place of fear and we're freaking out, then it becomes unwise. It's kind of like it becomes very reactive. And there could be this kind of like hiding out or saying no to everything, and like no, it's like a. But it feels very different to me in the body. Like even as I talk about it right now, like when I was saying the stuff right before, it felt kind of grounded and sort of smooth but yet kind of strong. Whereas even when I start even talking about the fear, like even the body language, it kind of becomes like, and in that state, there isn't the kindness and wisdom. It's actually very, in that feared place, it's like everything's a threat, which actually makes me like not care. Like it's just like, oh, just get away from me. As opposed to like, oh wow, I really appreciate, your sensitivity and mine, and how can we be careful and thoughtful. So they feel really different, don't they? Like the flavor of them is really different. And I think when we're in the place when we're terrified and we're scared like that, I'm not judging that, that's not a bad thing, but I think what we need in those times is support. It's like, oh shit, I'm really freaking out. And part of freaking out is almost like, yo, I'm too freaked out to take care of myself. Like I'm so freaked out I kind of can't deal. So I actually need others. And that's fundamental, you know? I mean, that's who we are as a species. You know? Like humans, our whole thing, our whole survival is based on our ability to connect and cooperate and create community, right? Like tribes. Because I mean, like, you know, the human animal by itself, you know, one isolated human is kind of like the most vulnerable animal. I think a group of raccoons could kick our ass, I think. You know? It's like, I really, like, but it was a group, right? Then it's like, yeah, well, then we can take over the world. It's like, so I think when we isolate, it's just inherently terrifying. You know, I remember reading this thing, they were talking to, it's like an interview with some tribe leader in Africa, like some kind of really far out tribe. And they asked, the question was just, they actually asked them how they handle like crime and delinquency like in their community. And they said, well, you know, they did well, then we reach out to the person. Well, they said, but what if like they just keep doing bad things? And this tribe leader said, he said, well, I mean, if that happens, then we just kick them out of the tribe. And he goes, and then they die. Like that's just like a death sentence. And that's real. So I think that instinct is in us. So I think that's what happens when we're freaking out. There's this instinct to kind of often to isolate because it's like everything's a threat. But in doing that, we just get more scared. It kind of becomes this like, evil cycle where like what we actually need is to come together to feel more safe. And there's something about that, the other mode where it's talking about the care and the sensitivity. It feels interdependent. It feels very empathic and interconnected. And I think that's its strength, right? It's like, but when we care about each other, it's like then you feel connected, and then there's a lot of support in that. Anybody else?
Your comment about not trying to solve it struck me because I think in situations like this, that inevitably just is the quick route to blame and just leaning on blame to make it okay.
Yeah.
It's striking me how psychologically when you're saying hold space, really what that's doing is just trying to tie it off and cauterize it and make it not hurt and make it over.
Yeah.
And it bothered me how quickly the conversation turned to that.
Yeah.
Because it's so insulting, I think, to how people are feeling, but trying to view it as other people just reflexively, without the tools to not do anything else, are just trying to, to them it's helping or it's something,
right.
But it's this unconscious motivation to just, I have to tie this off, I can't look any more space.
Yeah. Yeah, did you all hear what she said? Did you all hear? Yeah, and I think what's helpful is when you hear people doing that, if you can stay compassionate to see it the way you're seeing it, you're like, oh, that person's overwhelmed. Like that's what that is. Like and I think, you know, I've kind of started to see things in a different way in the last 6 months or so, where I think of almost everything now as, like any difficulty we're having, like you're having in your life, I think it's always about the lack of support. Like for many years I've always felt like, no, I'm gonna like get it together and like get better at whatever, I'll handle whatever better. And I've looked at my life where I've looked at like what's going, like there's areas of my life that work well and I can handle this and this, and then other areas that aren't as good. And then when I looked at it through this paradigm, it was like, oh shit, every one of the things that's good or that's, you know, working is like, oh, I have more support in those areas. And in these, like, that's the missing link. That's actually the weak link, is I'm not supported enough. It's not that I'm failing at it. And so when I see that now, I'm like, oh, that person's not feeling supported enough. Like, that's what that is. You know, it's not this person being, you know, whatever name you want to call them. But it's also hard to do that. I mean, sometimes it's infuriating or, you know, frustrating. But it's helpful if you can kind of make that translation, as you kind of read between the lines and you're like, oh, you know, like, I'll have this experience, someone's really angry and spouting off, and I'm like, oh, wow, this person's really scared. Like, that's what that is. I mean, so much so that they have to do that to protect themselves. I remember reading this, I don't remember where this quote is from, but it said, don't act so big, you're really not that small. Yeah. So, I mean, this is why, I mean, this community and, you know, my community at home and stuff, I feel so grateful because I don't know, like the things like the capacity I have to be with things, I used to go, well, that's because I've meditated. It's like, no, it's not. It's because I have support. It's because I'm held by enough support that I can be with certain things. And the things I can't be, it's like, yeah, because I'm not supported enough. And I just kind of lately, I see that as the answer to everything. You know? And it's such it's funny to come to that after all these years, because I think for many years, for me, and I think this is not uncommon, the attraction to Buddhism was like, I'm just going to learn not to need anybody. It's like, no, I'm going to totally, like, I'm going to be enlightened, and I'm going to, like, I'm just going to, you know, I'm going to let go of suffering, and I'm just going to be so great that, you know, everything's going to be so resolved and so smoothed out that I just won't, I won't need anybody. I'll be kind of so phenomenally self-sufficient. And it's like, yeah, that was the fantasy of a real scared, isolated person. Right? Who was then, of course, attracted to the fantasy that, like, great, I won't have to need anybody. And it's just funny to come all the way around and be like, no, yeah, you do. I mean, that's why the Buddha, you know, it's like Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Like, it's included. It's one of the three jewels. So, yeah. But, you know, that's the human thing. You know, the mind wants to figure stuff out. The mind's very uncomfortable with mystery, with just not knowing. You know? And that's all the mind can do, is it, like, that's all it's got to offer, so it does. I mean, I actually often, like, will watch my mind do that, and I'll be like, oh, well, thank you. I almost see it as this, like, little kid trying to be like, here's a bunch of thoughts, you know? And it's like, yo, man, this is an emotional thing happening here. I don't need more thoughts. You know? It's just like the wrong tool. Anybody else?
I got an email from my son this morning. He's working in South America, but he and his girlfriend are very hooked into the Oakland Warehouse art scene. They were there for many years, so this is a huge deal to him. And he's completely isolated. He's running a kitchen in this adventure resort in Patagonia. He's like, it took him 2.5 days, airplanes and boats to get there from San Francisco. So it's real isolated. He's real on his own. His girlfriend is leaving the 13th to go down there with their dog, so he won't. So he's basically completely on his own, working with a group of people that he does not know at all. And this happens, and he's completely flipped out, isolated, alone, feeling way overwhelmed and unsupported. So, I respond with all the support that I can give him. And I know his mother's responded for all the support that she can give him. And so have his friends. I see all the traffic on Facebook and on his blog. And so we're all like rallying around this guy who's like thousands of miles away from this tragedy that struck part of his community. And that's just such an ancillary part of this. There's got to be hundreds, maybe more, people who are like that, kind of away from this scene that's happened to them, and they're just like totally freaked out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think of like, what does support mean? And it can take on different forms, but I think at its core, it's really just like, it's like, hey, can you help me be with this? And we think of support, or we try to, like, often, if we see someone, suffering or grieving or sad, we want to fix it, right? We want to, so you see someone crying and you're like, well, let me, how do I get them to stop crying? And hopefully we're a little more advanced than that, but that response. And I actually think, what it really is like, hey, can you help me be with this? Can I help you be with it? Because there's nothing ever really wrong with our experience. This is one of the things, often we think there's something wrong with our experience and we're trying to change it. But really the experience we're having is organic. It by definition is just what it is. The difficulty is in our capacity to be with it, to allow it. So we interfere with it and we try to stop it or manage it or fix it. And a lot of times it's just as simple as like, well, it's just too much to be with by ourselves. It's like the lack of support. It's like, hey, by myself this is overwhelming, but if I can connect with others, can we be with it together? Or can you help me be with it? Or can I help you be with it? And really, at its core is like, if whatever experience is happening, if you can be with it, then there's no problem. It may be very painful. It may be excruciating. But if you can be with it, then it is what it is. So we think of the experience as the question, but the real question is our capacity, not the thing itself. Does that make sense? And I think we often don't realize that's the question, is the capacity to be with things as they are. And I'm glad he has you, and that even in such a remote place, it's still possible. Is there a hand over here, or do you have anything?
I feel like sometimes part of being supported is also like setting yourself up so you can actually be supported.
Yeah.
I find sometimes that I hurt myself by hiding certain things from my community because I'm maybe too ashamed to share them.
Right.
And so then I kind of isolate myself, and that's when because I just feel like if you don't put yourself in a position where you can be supported, it's not going to happen magically.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you like,
Yeah.
you know, since you've been thinking about that, it seems like the past few months. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
thought on that aspect as well.
Well, I do. I mean, that's this like mistaken reflex, right? There's this way that we get into this space of like, well, let me isolate, get everything fixed, and then once I'm presentable, then I'll come out and connect, because I'll be so lovable, and you know, I'll kind of iron all my shit out, and then, like, you know, everyone will be cool with me because I'll be so flawless. And it's like exactly the opposite of that, you know? It's like, well, no, like that's exactly the unwise movement, right? That's exactly like the wrong direction. Because actually whatever difficulties you're having, like we were saying earlier, what you need is more support. So this is where like the shame we feel is kind of one of the biggest obstacles. And to tell you the truth, for me, what really helped us is actually learning to stay with shame. So when you feel shame, I mean, shame is another feeling. I think that's actually probably the biggest one. You ever just like touch shame for a second? You're just like, ooh, and let's just move the hell away from that. Where I found if you can actually just let yourself stay with it a bit and kind of not freak out. Because, I mean, it's just a normal human emotion, right? Shame, embarrassment, all these things. They're wild, too. Shame is a funny feeling because part of its characteristic is it feels like you're the only one, right? Like, it has this, something about it makes it feel like you're the only one feeling it. That's kind of the game it plays. That's like the evil spell of it. It sort of it makes you feel like you're somehow unacceptable, where it's really a perfectly normal feeling. Like I always figure if they got a word for it, that means it's common. Right? Like if there's a word in your language that is that feeling, that means many people have felt it. And so I think that's actually the obstacle that we often need to overcome is can we look at each other while we feel embarrassed? You know, and it's the embarrassment that makes us want to run away. And that's really sad. I mean, hopefully, you know, we have people in our lives or we create communities like this where the ethos of this community isn't like, hey, everyone, come in and be awesome. And like, how awesome are you? It's like, no, I mean, do that out there. Come in here and be a human being. You know, come in here and be fallible. Just, you know, just be a person. And it's a very humbling, beautifully humbling kind of thing. And I think with Buddhist communities like this, it's sort of inherent. I don't know if you guys feel this way. I feel like, look, if you're here, like you could put the pretense down. You wouldn't be here if it was all so awesome, right? So by the very fact that you're here means you had a hard time. Which means then you look around, you're like, hey, look, these are all my fellow sufferers. And like, great, we don't have to pretend. Because nobody comes to Buddhism because like life is so awesome. Right? I mean, you've come to a practice where the first tenet, like the first noble truth is there is suffering in life. And it's like the first thing he taught. You know that? Like the very first thing the Buddha taught was like, hey, have you all noticed that shit really sucks sometimes? That's the first noble truth. And it's great, right? He taught that after his enlightenment, and the other 5 ascetics were like, uh-huh. Like, cool. So we got that. So it's beautiful to be in this room because it's like, yeah, we can all stop pretending. And then, you know, then we can connect, and it's a beautiful thing. You know, you look over at your fellow people and you're like, hey, man, you having a hard time? Yeah, me too. And then it's like, well, great, now we're together. And I think a lot of things change if you have to do them all by yourself. And if you had it and you did it with others. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of things really suck if you have to do them by yourself. If you're doing it with a group of people, now it's a party. You know, it's like, all right, well, we got each other. So yeah, I mean, I think when we're having the hardest time, that's just, I mean, that if we can all remember that, like when you have that instinct to isolate, like that's exactly when you shouldn't isolate. It's like with meditation, I tell a lot of my students that say they're too busy to meditate, and I always say, like, if you're really too busy to meditate, then you really have to meditate. So it's the same kind of paradox. I guess we should end there. Just take a moment. Before we'll have announcements in a second, but just let yourself, again, just make room for your experience right now. Again, I find what's helpful is to let yourself not know what your experience is. Let it really come to you. And let yourself sort of be kind of big enough to hold whatever is arising. It reminds me, actually, a teacher once said this to me. He said, imagine if you have like a cup, and then the liquid inside the cup starts, like I say, it gets full and it keeps coming and starts to overflow the cup. And he would say, well, that's what overwhelm is. When we're overwhelmed, that's what it is, like the liquid is spilling out. And so usually the instinct is like, well, let me fucking put a lid on it and just keep it in there. And he would say, no, just make the cup much bigger. Let the cup become huge. Where that same amount of liquid becomes tiny in an otherwise large container. So when we get scared of our experience, when our experience is kind of too much, this idea of clamping down on it, it makes our container even smaller. We become tight and rigid. Whereas what's actually helpful is to relax and let yourself get big. Let yourself, so your capacity, I mean literally that word, the capacity, can expand. And that same exact experience is now not overwhelming. And then we can meet whatever is arising and hold it with this kind of loving, caring quality. The way we would hold a child or something very precious. And the fact is that something is you. You are very precious. This experience you're having now is very precious. Life is very precious. And when we recognize that preciousness, the compassion just comes. The tenderness naturally arises when the preciousness is seen. Jason, did you want to say anything? Do you have some announcements?
Hey everybody. A couple of quick things going on this month. December 24th on Christmas Eve, we're going to have potluck here for anybody who, whether it's the difficulty of the holidays or just the desire to hang out with like-minded folk, will be here probably from about 6 to 9. It's a Saturday night. If you want any info, come talk to me. On New Year's Eve, we're going to have an intention setting ceremony, and Vinny is going to be leading that. If you were here last New Year's Eve with Jean, it was really a beautiful evening, so I'm sure it will be again. We're still nailing down the details, but it should be, I think, about like 7:30 to 10-ish, something like that. And the last thing is, over by the books and the desk there, we've got a bin for a food drive, and I would love to see that get filled up. So if everyone wants to bring in something over the next few weeks, well, we'll probably keep it after the holidays too, but just bring some food to share. And then Denny wanted to make one quick announcement.
I didn't know he was doing this food drive, but I was walking around handing out underwear and socks to homeless people today, and I'd like to keep that going. So I'm going to bring in a box. If people have any clothes they'd like to donate, underwear, socks, feminine products for women are always great, water bottles, sleeping bags, warm jackets, etc. I'll make sure they get distributed out or donated to another nonprofit. So I'd like to keep that going through the winter as well, because there's a lot of people on the streets right now. So every Monday I'll pick it up. So if you guys want to bring anything in.
Yeah, thank you. And socks, I gotta say, I had this experience recently where I had an extra pack of socks in the car, and when I pulled up to a stoplight, there's a homeless guy, and I said, "Oh, hey man, you want some socks?" And I'll tell you, there's been times in my life where I was in a particularly generous mood and I've given like a bunch of money. You know, you ever have that moment where you're like, "Hey, here's like $40 or $50 or whatever." I've never made somebody's day that much. This dude was so happy, and it really made me realize, like yeah, man, things like that we take so for granted. But can you imagine, like, if you're cold and you're outside and you've got like wet socks or whatever? Like, it was literally one of the most touching moments of my life. I happened to just give this guy some socks. So it's huge. It's just funny because it's something that we take so for granted that like is so significant to somebody on the street.
Yeah, this guy sat down next to me in the coffee shop and he smelled so bad, and I was like, oh my God, like, and then I was like, hold on, I'll be right back, and I brought him socks, and he was like,
yeah.
He's like, so great.
Yeah.
It is actually like the reason for socks specifically for anybody who's like, why are people freaking out about socks, is actually like, it's not just the fact that it's cold and uncomfortable if you're out there and it's raining and you're in wet socks, but it's also a lot of people who are on the streets and, you know, your shoes get soaked, your feet get cold, but you don't have any way to get dry and warm. There can be some really significant health ramifications, especially if you're diabetic already or have wounds that can get infected. So it's actually one of the biggest causes of like injury and illness and things. It can go very, very wrong. So it's actually like a really deep act of caring.
Yeah, thank you. And lastly, you know, we have the Dana basket, and as you all know, completely we run on your generosity and your donations. So we thank you for that. All right, to close, let's bring your awareness back to your body. allowing whatever's there. And let yourself feel the support in the room. And if you're at home watching this online, just feel this greater community. You don't even have to be in the room. But that there's this way that we're all holding each other. And we're simultaneously holding and being held. And our ability to hold is supported by at the same time that we're being held. And feeling that the truth underneath it all is the way we care about each other, whether we admit that or not, or do anything about it. It's in there, which is why tragedies like this touch us so deeply. Because in the end, we are interconnected. And we always have been, and we always were. And moments like this really bring it to our awareness. May the merit generated by us coming together like this, as a community, as a sangha, to hold each other and support each other, and to be held and to be supported, and to acknowledge and honor our interdependence. We share this merit with beings everywhere. May we all be free. May you all be safe.